Welcome and thank you for watching this MW Estate Planning video on protective property trusts. Let me introduce myself. My name is Matthew Wildman and I'm the Senior Estate Planner with MW Estate Planning. MW Estate Planning are members of the Society of Will Writers and comply to their code of practice. So why would you potentially need a protected property trust? Well, let's take a very common situation. Two people, Janet and John, hold the family home in joint names. That's just the way they own the land in the land registry. It's the most common way of owning the land. So the title is owned jointly by Janet and John. The potential problem arises on the death of the first joint tenant. One of the partners passes on, in this case Janet and John. If John was to pass on sometime in the future, the house would automatically transfer to Janet, the surviving partner. That seems like a very reasonable thing to happen and a very common thing to happen. However, if you've potentially got children from that original marriage, what happens if Janet remarries? New spouse comes along, and then what happens if Janet passes on? The house would automatically potentially go to her new spouse, and the children from the original marriage could end up with nothing. It's called sideways disinheritance, and unfortunately it's very common nowadays. So how does a protected property trust help that situation? Let's take the same situation. Janet and John, lovely family. They own their house as joint tenants. So the situation is, if one of them passes on, it automatically reverts to the surviving partner, but they want to make sure that in their wills that their children inherit, no matter what happens in the future. In order to do that, you need to just change the way you own the land to what's called tenants in common. It doesn't affect anything about who pays the mortgage or who pays the bills. It's just about how you own the land. So what a protected property trust does, or the same situation, Janet and John, but you change the way you own the land into tenants in common. So now John owns 50% of the house, Janet now owns 50% of the house. As I said, it makes no difference about who pays mortgages or bills, etc., etc. But what that enables you to do, that in John's will, he can now say, on my death, 50% of my share of the house, my 50%, will go to the children. And Janet does the same thing in her will. On her death, my 50% goes to my children. However, they can't have it yet. You put what's called a life interest trust around the property, which basically says, yes, the children will have that, but they can't have that until the death of the surviving partner. Of course, every individual family situation is different, which is why it's important to seek professional advice. Speak to someone like myself about your personal circumstances. However, there are a number of common questions people ask about this protected property trust. The most common question is what happens if they want to move, the surviving partner wants to move, etc. That's not a problem at all. If the house was sold, the 50% would be placed in a trust fund for the children, which they wouldn't get to access to until the surviving partner has passed on. The other most common question is what happens if the sale of the house, my half of the property, the surviving partner's half of the property, isn't enough to buy a house outright. Quite common with downsizing, etc. So take an example where, let's say the house is worth £200,000. That's sold, and he wants to move into the partner survivor wants to move into a small little flat, but that's worth £150,000. Obviously, she only has £100,000 from her half. So what she can do, however, what I always recommend with all trusts that I set up, these protected property trusts, is the surviving partner is one of the trustees. So the surviving partner goes to the trustees, like I said, one of herself, usually one of the other children, or a trusted colleague or friend, and says, look, can I borrow £50,000 interest-free for the rest of my life to invest in this property? Well, £50,000 into a £150,000 house, you're never going to lose that money, as long as the building's insured. So yes, absolutely, yes, you can borrow that £50,000 or whatever sum you need, interest-free for the rest of your life, in order to buy that property. Eventually, on the death of that surviving partner, that £50,000 or however much was borrowed would be paid back into the trust and then out to the children. Another sort of common fear is, can the beneficiaries, generally children but not always beneficiaries, force the surviving partner to sell the house? They want mum or dad out the house to sell it. No, they can't. The life interest trust is very specific. It says they cannot force the sale. So the surviving partner can live in that house if they wanted to for the rest of their life, or if they bought a secondary property and used part of the trust money from the other half to buy that property. Again, there would be a life interest trust in that says no, you cannot force mum or dad or whoever to sell that property. It is your property for the rest of your life. I have been asked a couple of times in the past whether the surviving partner can still get a mortgage. Absolutely, as long as you meet the normal criteria for a mortgage, i.e. affordability, equity in the property, etc., etc. There's no reason why you couldn't get a mortgage on the property. Equity release is probably about the one downside for protected property trust. It's not impossible to get equity release on a property in the future that has a trust around it, but I have to be honest, it is more difficult. My advice generally to clients who have asked me about that, if you are considering in the future, equity release, protected properties may not be the best option for you. However, individual circumstances are always different, so it's worth, again, as I've mentioned, talking to a professional, going through your personal circumstances. But in general rule, if equity release was something you would want to be doing in the future, a protected property trust may not be the right thing for you. So just a quick summary of what this video has been about. Protected property trusts are there to secure your loved one's future. No matter what happens in the future, remarriage, reckless spending, etc., etc., you know the people you wanted to inherit will get their inheritance. Importantly, the surviving spouse has the flexibility to live in that house for the rest of their life. They can move, they can downsize, etc., etc. They can even borrow money from the other half of the trust if they don't have quite enough, as long as it's sound investment. The trustees there's no reason why the trustees would not agree to that. The important thing is it gives you peace of mind that your loved ones are secured for the future. Thank you for watching this MW estate planning video about protected property trusts. As I've mentioned a number of times, each individual is very different and your personal circumstances will need to be tailored to any particular solution you might be requiring. So it is important to speak to a qualified advisor about your particular situation. If you'd like to get in contact with us about this matter, we can offer a free consultation, no obligation consultation. Our telephone number is 01202 978 720, or you can drop me an email at info@mwesstateplanning, or one word, .co.uk, or go to our website mwesstateplanning.co.uk, and of course we do have Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn and our YouTube account, which the details are online. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much once again for watching this video. If we can help in any way, please do get in contact.